In the retelling of San Francisco's history, the year 1906 is often highlighted as a period of dramatic upheaval, marked by the chaos and destruction of a violent earthquake. This seismic event struck with force at the early hour of 5:12 in the morning, leaving the city engulfed in roaring fires that consumed it for an agonizing span of 3 days. The catastrophe resulted in a landscape of devastation, where more than 400 city blocks were reduced to smoldering ruins. Yet the real narrative of intrigue lies not in the visible wreckage above, but in the hidden depths below the surface. This untold story, one that scarcely made its way into official reconstruction reports and remains buried in the footnotes of municipal history, began with a massive cleanup operation beneath the city. In the aftermath of the disaster, a strategic effort was launched to clear the sprawling debris that littered San Francisco. Engineers were tasked with the formidable job of removing the rubble from collapsed edifices and preparing the ground for the city's ambitious reconstruction. All eyes were on the city as it attempted to rise, phoenix-like, from its ashes. The primary aim was straightforward: to stabilize the terrain, assess the damage comprehensively, and evaluate whether the land could support the weight of a reborn metropolis. However, as workers delved into the destruction, an unexpected chapter began to unfold. They stumbled upon layers of the underground that had been hidden from sight for decades. Beneath the layer of rubble from 1906, and deeper than anyone had anticipated, crews discovered a network of tunnels and chambers that did not correspond to any known infrastructure. The sheer scale of these subterranean passages was astounding, and their construction was unlike anything recorded in San Francisco's historical archives. The stonework bore no resemblance to the Victorian-era architecture that was thought to define the cityscape of the time. This remarkable finding did not make it into public reconstruction reports, nor did it appear in the newspapers documenting the city's rebuilding efforts. However, within the internal notes of that pivotal year, a cryptic phrase recurrently appeared: pre-existing tunnels, unexpected depth, origin unknown. The official narrative would later simplify these discoveries, attributing them to old sewer lines, forgotten mining tunnels, or simply misattributing them as earthquake damage. The consensus was that there was nothing unusual or worthy of further discussion. Yet, the survey photographs from the period, developed in the dim confines of municipal offices as San Francisco was being rebuilt, told a different story. These images revealed workers standing beside brick-lined passages, crafted with a precision far superior to anything documented in the city's construction records. The tunnels were wide enough to accommodate carriages, yet conspicuously absent from every map. Arched corridors were fitted together with such expertise that even in the grainy quality of early 20th century photography, the craftsmanship was unmistakable. Drainage systems appeared to have been carved directly into the bedrock, unaccounted for in any city planning document. As the digging continued, the layers unveiled a history that appeared to have been deliberately buried and forgotten. Initially, cleanup teams sought to categorize their findings in the simplest terms possible: old utility tunnels, abandoned mine shafts, or natural fissures created by the earthquake. Yet, as more notes were compiled and additional passages were uncovered, the inconsistencies multiplied. Why were some tunnels constructed on a scale far larger than anything San Francisco required in the 1800s? Why were certain sections lined with bricks so precisely laid that even modern engineers could not elucidate the technique? Why did some corridors extend beneath areas that were reportedly untouched hillside before American settlement? These questions perplexed even the most traditional city planners. The reconstruction necessitated meticulous surveys of ground stability. Yet the subterranean infrastructure beneath sections of downtown North Beach and the financial district seemed designed for a city far larger and much older than the San Francisco recorded in public history. It became clear to the cleanup teams that the depth and scale of these underground features did not align with any known construction timeline. While they avoided terms like hidden history, they were acknowledging something equally disconcerting. Someone had built beneath this land before, an intricate network, not just simple tunnels or primitive mine shafts. As documentation increased, so did the silence surrounding the discoveries. reports became shorter, descriptions more vague, and photographs ceased to reveal the full extent of the passages. Eventually, the excavation zones were hastily sealed once more in the latter part of 1906 and early 1907, filled with earthquake debris and overlaid with new construction. Much of what had been exposed was returned to darkness. Only fragments of information remain: notes, a handful of photographs, and the quiet testimonies of city workers who had witnessed the tunnels before sections were permanently closed. Yet even from these remnants, a pattern emerges. Passages too elaborate for the acknowledged history of San Francisco, brickwork too advanced for the accepted timeline, and construction methods that seem to belong to an entirely different era of building. When reconstruction teams initially ventured beneath the ruined city, their expectations were straightforward. They anticipated finding earthquake damage, perhaps some residual basement foundations, and scattered remnants from the early gold rush period. Nothing unusual, nothing extraordinary. But within weeks, these assumptions disintegrated. Rather than encountering a neat sequence of collapsed buildings and natural bedrock, teams unearthed a stratified series of infrastructure layers that defied the behavior expected of a normal city strata. The first anomaly was the alignment. Each layer post-earthquake, pre-earthquake Victorian, and whatever lay beneath appeared to follow the same grid, the same orientation, the same geometric pattern. It was peculiar, as different eras are not expected to align so perfectly. Different city planners, different construction companies, and different decades do not build in perfect alignment with infrastructure buried meters below them. Yet, beneath San Francisco, they did. Tunnels from one era ran directly above tunnels from another. Passages aligned with those buried far below them, and drainage systems shared the same trajectory, even when separated by unknown decades or centuries. It was as if every construction effort on this soil was guided by an original city plan, one that had vanished from all archives. As the digging continued, the layers grew stranger. Beneath the expected Victorian-era brick and timber, workers encountered stonework that bore no resemblance to 19th century construction. The passages were much larger, the brickwork much tighter, and the systems far too mathematically precise for anything documented in San Francisco's timeline. Some tunnels appeared almost overbuilt, with perfectly arched chambers, displaying flawless curvature, crafted with precision, unmatched by Gold Rush-era methods. The most perplexing discovery was entire sections of the deepest tunnels filled with hardened mud and sediment, packed so densely that it took days to excavate. Layer upon layer of compressed earth suggested these passages had been deliberately buried or naturally submerged over time. Yet, there was no historical record of San Francisco experiencing flooding severe enough to fill underground tunnels to such depths. No maps indicated ancient waterways beneath these specific points. Nothing to explain why large sections of this deep infrastructure seemed entombed beneath layers of mud and debris. Survey photographs from 1906 and 1907 documented these findings, showing workers dwarfed by the colossal passages. The brickwork was laid with such precision that even today, engineers examine the archival images in disbelief. Arches and joints resembled infrastructure far older and far more sophisticated than anything attributed to Gold Rush San Francisco. However, the most unsettling detail was not what appeared in the photographs, but what was absent from the archives. Official reconstruction reports written in the years following the earthquake scarcely mention these features, and some drawings omit the deepest tunnels entirely. Beneath the bustling surface of certain cities, layers of infrastructure are often brushed aside with vague labels such as pre-existing utilities or remnants of earlier construction. Yet when one examines the photographs that capture these subterranean marvels, it becomes evident that they are far more intricate and complex than previously acknowledged. The silence surrounding these discoveries is conspicuous. If these deeper layers truly belong to well-documented historical periods, why were they not meticulously described? Why did the unusual construction methods not receive thorough documentation? Moreover, why were the photographs scattered across various city archives instead of being compiled into a comprehensive municipal report for public knowledge and scrutiny? Take, for instance, some of the brickwork revealed during these excavations. Unusually tight joints, surfaces that are eerily smooth, and patterns so uniform that they seem to challenge the conventional understanding of hand-laid brickwork. These constructions look less like the handiwork of craftsmen and more like the product of precise mass-produced techniques. Such methods of construction were not thought to exist at the time when these tunnels were supposedly built according to traditional timelines. The reconstruction teams unearthed a network of infrastructure that did not align with the known styles of the Gold Rush era, nor did it adhere to the engineering practices of the Victorian period. In fact, the findings did not even match themselves across different depths. Instead, they revealed a peculiar architectural language, one that appeared to span multiple eras yet remained unified in its sophistication and alignment. The discovery began with the chambers themselves. These were no mere mining tunnels or narrow utility passages. They were perfectly vaulted spaces, rooms crafted with precision, arches that maintained their form flawlessly over the decades, and brick vaults organized with a coherence that resembled the remnants of a grand infrastructure plan lost to time. Some chambers were completely sealed, filled with compressed mud, so dense that workers initially mistook them for solid bedrock. However, once opened, these chambers unveiled interiors that seemed untouched from the day they were closed. The walls were smooth and fitted with bricks in patterns that raised more questions than they answered. Then, there were the giant circular access shafts, a feature that still mystifies researchers today. Officially, these were later labeled as old wells or natural sinkholes, yet their design defies such explanations. These shafts were too symmetrical, too deep, and too perfectly cylindrical, as if crafted with tools capable of maintaining flawless roundness for dozens of meters below the surface. In some instances, the shafts were wide enough for multiple workers to descend side by side, while others narrowed gradually, resembling ventilation systems or mechanical access points for machinery. Workers in the early 20th century described them in private correspondences as engineered vertical passages, not wells, indicating a deliberate purpose, although the exact purpose remains an enigma. Another anomaly was in the placement of certain support structures. These were not merely holding up the streets above. Many were positioned in ways that defied the engineering logic of Victorian San Francisco. Massive brick pillars supported sections that appeared not to require reinforcement, and foundation walls extended far beyond the footprint of any documented building above ground. This raises a disconcerting possibility that the city above may not simply rest on natural bedrock, but on an expansive infrastructure whose full extent was never recorded, mapped, or explained in the official history. As workers dug deeper, the findings grew stranger. Brick tunnels emerged with perfectly straight walls. Some surfaces were glazed and smooth, almost reflective. Others revealed precision-cut passages so uniform that modern construction engineers still debate the methods that could have produced them. Perhaps the most perplexing discovery was the presence of metal rails embedded in the tunnel floors, rails supposedly from a time predating any known rail system in the city. Some appeared corroded and rusted, fused to the brick, yet they were found in layers presumed to be older than the city's first streetcar lines. The official explanation labeled these as abandoned mining car tracks or forgotten industrial remnants. However, this does not account for why the rails appear beneath areas never documented as mining sites, nor why they follow organized patterns rather than random placements, suggesting the infrastructure of a transit system that was never officially constructed. Following these revelations, an unusual occurrence transpired. Tunnels were sealed anew, passages filled in, and deep sections of the sites were permanently cut off from further exploration. Some closures were officially attributed to structural safety concerns necessary to prevent collapses during reconstruction. Yet, the decision-making process regarding which tunnels were sealed first and which areas were buried permanently sparked quiet questions among observers. The passages closed immediately were always those that most challenged the official historical timeline. The perfectly vaulted chambers, the massive circular shafts, the unexplained rail systems, and the elaborate brick corridors seemed to extend far beyond the excavation zone. These tunnels were perhaps the most mysterious discoveries. They were not random passages, they were part of an organized network, a grid of infrastructure that resembled a planned city beneath the surface. Aligned, measured, and systematic, they seemed to connect to a much larger underground system, one that stretched beneath the city long before any city officially existed above. Yet almost as soon as they were uncovered, many tunnels were sealed again, their entrances blocked, their purpose unexplored, and their existence quietly erased from subsequent city maps. When examining the final months of the early 20th century reconstruction excavations, it becomes impossible to ignore an unsettling truth. The projects did not conclude naturally. They were abruptly stopped, not completed or concluded, but halted altogether. As cleanup teams delved deeper, the tone of their notes shifted. Early entries were factual and routine, but by the following year, the language became cautious, vague, and strangely incomplete, as if an unseen force controlled what could be documented. This is where the final mystery begins, for the last tunnels opened beneath the city were not ordinary. They were neither Victorian utilities nor gold rush remnants. They were something else entirely. Multiple reports, the few that have survived, describe brickwork that suddenly transitioned from the familiar to the inexplicable. Walls with joints so tight that not even a piece of paper could slide between them. Vaulted ceilings crafted with a precision pre-modern cities were not supposed to possess. Foundation systems designed for loads far heavier than anything documented above them. And corridors that extended beyond the excavation zone, disappearing into unexplored darkness beneath modern buildings. Yet, the most elaborate tunnels were the ones filled in first. The enigma of their purpose and origins buried beneath layers of time and administrative decision, leaving behind a mystery that continues to puzzle and provoke the imaginations of those who dare to question the official narratives of history. The workers engaged in a laborious task, carefully covering entire corridors and obstructing entrances, meticulously filling the newly uncovered spaces with earthquake debris. The actions were swift and decisive, not a gradual process. The official reasons given included damage from the earthquake, safety issues, and reconstruction priorities. However, one cannot help but question why the oldest, most pristine, and structurally sound tunnels were the first to be sealed. Curiously, the most damaged sections were left open to be documented. This seems perplexing, unless those deeper layers posed a threat of a different nature, not a physical danger, but a historical one. Consider the implications if the infrastructure beneath San Francisco were to reveal construction techniques that surpassed the capabilities of the Gold Rush era. If some of these passages bore no resemblance to any known city plans, it could potentially dismantle the entire accepted narrative of San Francisco's founding. Envision the possibility that modern San Francisco is constructed atop something far more ancient, something grand in scale, something meticulously engineered, something beyond our own creation. What if the tunnels filled with mud were not the result of natural flooding, but were instead intentional efforts by later generations to conceal or repurpose what existed before them? Perhaps this is why the discoveries unearthed in 1906 were quietly reburied, not to safeguard the sites, but to protect the prevailing narrative. The surviving photographs speak volumes, depicting workers standing beside passages that appear almost industrial, with arches that resemble modern engineering marvels, and drainage systems too advanced for their supposed age. These are not the kinds of findings that historians are eager to explain. Rather, they are the sorts of discoveries that are often left unspoken. This leads us to a pressing question. Why were the deepest evidence, the most ancient infrastructures, and the most advanced layers sealed away once more? When viewed from a distance, a pattern emerges. The immaculate brickwork was buried, the enormous circular shafts were hidden, the inexplicable rail systems were concealed, the elaborate vaulted chambers were covered, and the organized tunnel networks were sealed. Even parts of the photographic records vanished, as if the excavation had inadvertently unveiled a chapter of history that was never meant to be revealed, an era older than the gold rush, predating American settlement, and older than the narrative we have been taught. For a fleeting moment in 1906, the earthquake opened the earth just enough to provide a glimpse. But instead of seizing the opportunity to study it, the response was to close it once again, to seal it, to fill it, to forget it. or perhaps to feign ignorance. For if San Francisco indeed rests atop infrastructure created by a civilization that is no longer acknowledged, then the true question is not what was discovered in 1906, but rather what else might lie hidden beneath the cities of the world. What other tunnels, what other networks, and what other layers have been quietly reburied long before the advent of cameras? The excavation of 1906 was not merely an effort to clean up after an earthquake. It was a fleeting glimpse, an accidental peek into a version of history that we were never meant to witness. This entire exploration hints at the existence of many more cities with untold stories waiting to be uncovered. Perhaps there are other places, other cities, where similar chapters of history remain hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be discovered.